Castle or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. Hey, this is normally breaking in here, not typically doing it this way, but you're now watching part 2 of my interview with Ann Lacey, who is the North American director of the Eastern Flyway for the Sandhill crane, and I guess the other crane in our country as well, which is the whooping crane. But we have an interview with her regarding Sandhill cranes. So if you haven't seen part 1, you want to stop here and go back to the previous podcast and view part 1. This particular podcast, we're getting into some of the details regarding some of the damage that sandhill cranes do, as well as getting into some of the control methods that's suggested, and also resources for how to deal with sandhill cranes. So you may not think you have to deal with sandhill cranes now, but the fact their populations are growing, and there's also some non-migratory species and where conflicts are beginning to emerge, particularly for those of you down in the Florida area. And so you may want to hang out and listen to this, because you never know when the sandhill crane might be coming to an area near you. And so we have them there. We have them here in Montana, but they're also in the east as well, and also certainly the central part of the country as well. So stay tuned. Watch the end of our interview with Ann Lacey. Thanks for coming along. Do take a few moments, if you would, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell. If you don't like dealing with YouTube, you can also visit me, of course, over on Rumble under Wildlife Control Consultant. Hope you enjoy the rest of the interview. So if we had a landowner, let's flip this. Typically, we're dealing with wildlife control operators are dealing with a damage situation, but there are occasions where wildlife control operators are being asked to help the recovery of a species by managing typically mesopredators, right? So raccoons,
Sure, yeah.
coyotes, and of course otter. But so if someone was being hired, how much, if they were controlling these mesopredators, do you have an idea of how much that would improve recruitment? Has there been any research on the recruitment side?
The population up here is so robust, and that predator balance is so off in most areas. I'll just speak to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
We have so many. I hear packs of coyotes at my house. I don't live too far from here.
Yeah.
And with the drought that we've had this year, and every little wetland has at least one, if it's a bigger wetland, it might have more than one sandhill pair nesting in it.
Yeah.
It's been so dry that that water, because they can't roost in trees,
Yeah.
they need that water to roost in, that I think this year's productivity will be way down.
Way down. So it could help substantially if you had a good mesopredator control then.
It could. Because we've talked about that with our whooping crane population, trying to establish that migratory population here in Wisconsin, also kind of following that same flyway. But nature hates a vacuum. It's just so hard to get rid of enough that one pair makes a success in that 1 year. It's really more experience than predator removal.
Okay.
So that's a hard one to answer.
Yeah, I figured I'd throw that out because there are some situations where some wildlife control operators can be looking into that. And there are some people out there that have some skills. Typically, they're used down in the hunting areas in Alabama and Mississippi, where they go in and manage some hunting preserves to reduce, so they have more animals to hunt, and so they'll remove the mesopredators, have more ducks or deer recruitment, and they get paid to do it. So they're almost like paid, and they cover some pretty large acreages. So some of these guys, typically they're men, they can put up some huge numbers. It is truly, some of them are incredibly gifted, but we'll digress off of that.
Well,
but I think
the Mississippi sandhill crane, which is one of the non-migratory populations, and they are down in the Gulf Coast. They were established as an endangered species in 1973. They were one of the first birds on the endangered species list.
Yeah.
And the National Wildlife Refuge was established for that species specifically. It's a beautiful wildlife refuge. It's longleaf wetland pine complex. Oh, it's just gorgeous. And there's so little of that ecosystem left.
Yeah.
Beautiful refuge. And they have been managing predators there for years for the Mississippi sandhill crane.
Yeah. So
they've been doing it for many, many years. So
yep.
it's
Well, you have to do it.
it's
You're right. In
effective.
terms of you'll create that vacuum, so there will be recruitment because some of these animals will travel pretty far. But all you got to do is get those young to maturity and then just do it again next year, like cutting grass.
Yep. Learn how to be a defensive parent. Yeah.
So let's now transition over to the agricultural area.
Yeah.
The damage, these are typically going to be the migratory birds, I would suspect, for the ag communities as a rule. Typically. And so what's some of the damage that farmers are suffering from sandhill cranes from the migratory birds?
Our focus here in the Great Lakes states, and we have research specific here in Wisconsin looking into this, is spring damage from cranes on germinating corn. And so much like the birds that come through the Platte River Valley, they're stopping in all of those cornfields to glean waste corn in the spring, all those carbohydrates. Same thing, our birds stage in the fall before on their way south on migration, and they gather in all of our beautiful Wisconsin cornfields here to glean that harvest corn. Not a problem.
Right.
So it's really in that about 2 weeks before corn reaches about the 4-leaf stage, enough that there's still some kernel there. And again, these birds, they learn quick. They are there year after year, and they have learned even to recognize the planter mark. And they can go in before that little green flag comes up to indicate yummy morsel here, that they can go down that row. And so it's a very unnatural, linear foraging pattern that they have, and they get the spacing and they will pull those germinating corn seeds right out of the ground. So using what we know about sandhills and this one thing, so they're omnivores, they'll eat anything else. What if we just take this one thing off the menu? They won't leave. They're territorial. They love these wide open fields so they can see predators. That's their, we plowed up prairie and replaced it with another grass, corn. So they like these areas, and you're hard pressed to convince them that they want to move elsewhere. So let's see if we can figure out this. And so using that kind of philosophy, we treat that corn. We were hearing from farmers that they were using a particular, I believe it was a insecticide, and the cranes didn't damage those fields. Turns out that was an organochloride. And besides not wanting to recommend that, we knew that was going to be taken off the market.
That's right.
And so in about 2006, it was taken off the market. But by that time, we had done a lot of field trials for Avapel. So this is the active ingredient is anthraquinone. And fruit trees will produce anthraquinones naturally, and that's what makes the fruit bitter. Trees want their seed to be dispersed, but not till it's ripe. And so by the time the fruit is ripe, the anthraquinone has gone away in the fruit and it's free to be dispersed. And so using that, Archean Life Science developed this seed treatment based on that chemical that plants produce already. And so we know also this is one that, because birds and plants have been evolving together for millennia now, it's also something that they won't acclimate to. And so we have done years and years of field testing, and now we have some published papers on the efficacy of this. So
what kind of results were you getting with, so I'm assuming they're treating the seed before it's planted.
Correct.
And what kind of efficacy reduction in damage were you seeing in your research?
There's two formulations, a liquid that is put on there, and there's lots, seed treaters do that for innumerable chemicals for corn growers. So the Avapel would go on the outside and it dries to this beautiful coating. There's also a dry formulation that is, it is not available right now. They removed it from the market per continued testing, but we realize that a corn seed can only take so much powder and it tends to come off easily.
Yeah.
But so focusing on the liquid treatment,
Okay.
very, very effective. So in our study area, we know this area and we know, so we surveyed the farmers, treated, not treated. So we knew exactly where that was. We do road surveys. So we knew exactly where cranes were using in any one field, where they were using and where they were not. And so we would go in after that vulnerable period would be done. And we looked at the seedlings per meter. We would count these 40-meter plots.
Yeah.
And calculate the seedlings per meter in the used and unused in the treated and non-treated fields. And so
Right.
you look at an untreated field and there were 2 to 3 seedlings per meter lower in the used areas. And it was almost equal in the treated fields. There was no difference between the crane used and unused portions of the field. So very, very effective.
Very effective.
I have seen them spit it out. So they
Yeah.
need to test it. They do need to dig down and taste one of those seeds to know it's there.
Right.
And much like my Labrador, when they get zapped by something, they need to try maybe one more.
Yep.
And then they figure it out.
Just to make sure.
Sure.
Yeah, and so it's the same active ingredient, folks, that's used for Canada geese. It's used to spray on grass to keep Canada geese. So
Yeah.
methylene thranolate, and then of course the anthraquinone. And so anthraquinone, the challenge with both of those repellents is the animal has to test it first. So make sure you tell your client, get your pesticide license, and make sure you get all that legal before you use this.
Yeah.
Use some of these things.
The terp spray is called flight control, and there might be a UV component to that.
I believe there is.
Yeah,
so they can see it before they attack it. Yep.
Exactly. And there's a graduate student now out of Fort Collins that is she's testing that as possible deterrent for cranes at airports for that, because right now it's just for geese right now. It's not labeled for cranes, but that also might keep cranes out of there is a problem. So here in Wisconsin, that is the bulk of the issue is on corn.
Okay. Any other plants?
Yeah, potatoes. Potatoes is a big one too.
Really?
That's harder. Yeah. So cranes they like, so at about the time that potatoes are ripe, getting ready for harvest, and they do vine kill. That is when cornfields, the structure is too high, the cranes aren't using them. Soybean fields even are too thick. They don't like using them. They are relegated to harvested hay fields, wheat, that's been harvested. But they're moving around and trying to find those open areas a lot more. So they see this novel field open up after vine kill, and they're like, oh, let's go in here and see what we have. And they will dig in the hills, so that they don't necessarily eat the tubers. They can if they're small enough. But it's just that pecking around, putting holes in the potatoes, exposing them to sun. And because of the nature of the potato crop, it's a smaller scale, but can be as much or more economic damage as cornfields. So that is something that, thinking about flight control and doing a spray, seeing if that deters them. But with corn seed, it's that solution is so brilliant because the corn seed disappears.
Right.
The anthraquinone doesn't get taken up into the plant. It breaks down very well, and there's no residue left over.
Okay.
When you're working with the actual food item, we don't want something that's a bittering agent being sprayed on potatoes and ruining that. Same goes for sunflower seeds and things like that. So we're still working on that, but the scale is a lot less. It's really corn that's the big one here in the upper Midwest.
So they will take sunflower seeds as well?
That's for thinking of the Dakotas and blackbirds.
All right. Oh, I got you. All right.
Yeah.
Yep. So in light of those, so that's going to be a huge challenge because the damage to the potatoes seems to be incidental because they're just foraging around to find, whatever, they're probably worms that are around the potato worms and this sort of thing
Bugs
that they're
and
going
whatnot,
after, bugs along. So that's going to be quite difficult to manage.
Yeah,
Because even if you wanted to spray, you can't really spray the potato is going to still be underground until it's harvested. So you're
yeah,
just going to be spraying the surface of the ground, whether that would be sufficient contact with the beak to cause a diversive reaction.
yeah. And that's
Yeah.
where that if there is a UV component that could, but then you need to go in and maybe do it 2 applications even before
Yeah. Yeah.
it's ready
And they
to
would have to have
harvest.
prior encounter with it. They'd have to have an encounter with it somewhere else. So
Yeah,
you'd have to have coordination between where maybe they were going at a cornfield in another state and then flying up, and then so they had that in their memory somewhere. So yeah,
yeah.
that's gonna be tough. So how much does uh, one of these birds eat? How much can they eat a day? So if we're talking about
Um,
them removing seeds, I mean, how many,
right.
I mean, would they do the entire, I mean, if you had a section, would they do an entire row in that section? Before they filled up? I mean, how much damage can they do?
We actually have a publication that deals with that too.
Okay.
It when we do our work capturing cranes, we bait them with corn, and
Okay.
they can eat maybe a cup of corn at one sitting, but then they are sated for the day. So I mean, they can eat, a couple hundred kernels in a day.
Yeah.
Um, dried corn in a pile is different than, moist corn in a field, and they are probably getting bugs as well.
Hmm.
But this is where the social structure also comes in, because in the spring, when these birds are doing the damage, they can two or two or more birds that are there, so it's not a territory. They can come in, and then the next day there could be 5, and the third day there could be 50. They
Okay.
find these areas to go, and so they can do a lot of damage in a little amount of time. But if there's a breeding pair that has any bit of that field as part of their territory, they will keep other birds out. And this is where it can be detrimental. One thing we haven't talked about is depredation permits. So
Right.
landowners can apply for a depredation permit
Right.
from the USDA. So because cranes are a non-game species here,
Right.
and they're a migratory bird, there has to be permission from the Fish and Wildlife Service. So those two link up.
Yeah.
But you have to exhaust all non-lethal means. So the farmer should be using Avapel, which is a trade name of the anthraquinone,
Right.
which should work. But there are all sorts of extenuating circumstances where that they just might not. And I know that the USDA will give out to certain landowners, they'll just give them their permit as a, here, just in case, year after year. They
Right.
may or may not have to use it. But if they use a depredation permit on a breeding pair of cranes, you have just removed the guards from the field.
Yeah.
And that might leave it open for the marauding hordes of non-breeding birds that come in.
And how large of an area will they defend? Is that food related?
Yeah, and it could be, in our study area, we might have one wetland that is 10 to 15 hectares, and
Okay.
it's surrounded by cornfields. And so if you think about the territories as pie wedges,
Yeah.
which the point would be where the nest is, and they will vigorously defend that area, and then they'll have their wider pie wedge out and their upland foraging area.
Okay.
And so you'll have this ring of cranes that are kind of protecting it. So the part next to the wetland tends to be where the cranes are focusing on, because that's closest to the wetland,
Right.
the least amount of space to travel. But non-breeding birds can travel up to 2 miles from their roosting wetland to forage.
Wow. 2
And then
miles.
they can move around opportunistically. And it's a matter of making sure that, that it's really the ability for a grower to buy the Avapel, because of course it costs money. It's another
Other
thing.
expense. Yep.
Yep. And finding somebody to treat it at the time that they need it. And then if they don't end up planting, like this year, we had such a bizarre spring with cold and rain and then heat and then drought, whatever. If they don't plant that treated corn, then they need to find some place that can store it. It is it can be stored and it can be viable the next year.
Yeah.
The treatment does not affect the viability if it is stored correctly.
Right.
But that's another thing. And so that is something that our next thing is, we know that we have a product that works.
Mm-hmm.
Now our project is making sure that product that works is available to the farmer in that way, that they can afford it, that they can find people to treat it relatively easily. And if they don't use that corn, that they can store it.
So it sounds like there's a niche business there that could be created. Is seed treatment something that a pest control operator can get a license for and do that product on their own property and then sell the results to someone else?
That is a very good question. I would love that if that could be the case, but I don't know. I mean, I don't think you'd need like a pesticide applicator license. This is a pesticide, quite honestly. And the crane is the pest. Right. But the chemical, it has its usual labeling and stuff, and that's on the Archean Life Science website.
Yeah.
But
so we have a category of the license in Montana where it says seed treatment. So someone would be able to take the training, probably it's a manual that they would read and take the test and then be licensed for seed treatment.
Sure.
Typically in our state, it's to remove to control fungus and disease on the seed as opposed to a vertebrate, but I don't see why it would
it's the same
be any different. It's the same, be any different, right? And so
it's a matter of volume and getting that specialized equipment. But then this is where people have their distributor, their dealer, their seed guy that they go to every year. So there might be a niche there, but it's interesting that you use that word, because even though we have millions of acres of corn in Wisconsin, then that's just Wisconsin, where Michigan has the same issue. And there's all of this corn that is potentially at risk for crane damage.
Right.
You'd think that the seed companies would be like, well, you know what, we're just going to offer a pre-treated seed to our growers, and they see it as such a niche that they need to see that there's a demand for it before they'll do it.
Right.
There should be this demand, but yet they're very reticent to do it.
It's we have a real problem in the vertebrate world because of trophic levels. And so my thought is, and the rule of thumb that I tell people is that 10% of the landowners suffered 90% of the damage. So you're absolutely correct, and you have a lot of acreage out there, but you're going to have the vast majority of them have minimal to no encounters with those birds. It's going to be those that are typically going to be near water that they're going to suffer. Same way with deer. I mean, we think, well, everyone would have problems with deer. The answer is no. The ones who are near the treed areas and who are near wetlands, they're going to have the damage from deer. And so we had this problem in Nebraska where an assistant dean, our assistant dean was saying, I've been to the corn board every year and they never mention vertebrate problems. And I believe him. He was probably correct. It never came up. It never came up. However, what he forgot to think about was that the farmers were actually petitioning the legislature, and this actually almost passed, where it allowed them to shoot deer at will.
Oh, so they're not going to complain about it because
they're not going to. Well, it didn't reach the level of the corn board because the corn board was dealing with bigger issues, not this minority of farmers who are going to become quite vocal. And minority is, it's all a matter of numbers, but that they were getting organized enough to saying, and it got so bad that the Fish, Game and Parks actually changed a rule that then they were handing out permits to farmers to kill. The problem was the farmers didn't want to shoot them because it's more time, it's more effort, then they'd have to do something with the carcasses. They wanted someone else to do it. So, but that's prevented that legislation from passing. Because they were trying to give a relief valve for these farmers. The point is that wildlife damage tends to always run under the radar. The people who suffer it are a minority. And so whenever you're dealing with a democracy, it's always the tyranny of the majority. And vertebrate control will never be the majority. Everyone will have insect damage, but only 10% are going to have vertebrate damage. So it never rises to the level.
Interesting. Okay, so that is a perfect segue to, there has been many, many calls for a hunting season of sandhills
Right.
in Wisconsin. And there are two very, very distinct ways to talk about this.
Yeah.
Talk about cranes hunting season as a solution to crop damage.
Mhm.
And then this is a managed species that we should be able to harvest because they're harvested other places.
Right.
And absolutely there's no crossover there. In my humble opinion,
Yep.
a hunting season will not solve, it will not even come close to helping with the crop damage issue.
Right.
Because right now the population, it is healthy,
Mhm.
to say the least. When people say there's too many of them, that
Right.
is the people that are seeing these birds come and decimate their fields for the most
Right.
part, or they're
Yeah.
hearing about it from others.
That's correct.
And there's too many of them. I don't know what that means. That is a value judgment.
Yeah, it's sociological carrying capacity versus biological carrying capacity.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. And they're probably, like I mentioned before, they're probably at carrying capacity in these really, really dense areas.
yeah.
The birds that are breeding, those birds are in the non-breeding flocks and they're going
Mhm.
elsewhere.
Yeah.
But the number of breeding birds really isn't changing at all.
Yeah.
So they're remaining steady. So there's that good news. So but then people say, well, if there's no way to hunt them enough to get the number down to where you would not have any damage complaints. That's not ethical. That's, nobody would call for a decimation of this species.
Yeah.
Back to Leopold's time when he thought that he was going to see
Right.
them go.
So biologically, yeah, so hunting would probably not reduce the numbers
Correct.
to a place where the producer would notice an improvement, other than those in maybe the marginal areas. So the question then would become: is there and we're getting to a little bit of the politics side of things and human dimensions? Is there a role by having a hunting season for those producers that are struggling with it, that they could then turn around and say, okay, I know I'm going to suffer crop damage from these birds, but I'm then going to get the flip side. I may get a tag to take one. So it's sort of a way to sort of like, yeah, you're losing corn on this side, but then you're able to hunt them on another, or allow hunting on your property where you can then sell the rights to some rich lawyer from New York or something. And where they're able to derive, now the bird changes from a quote pest to a revenue stream.
A revenue source.
So do you see any, so yeah, you're right. It doesn't solve, it's not stopping the corn damage, but it's giving that producer a different way of looking at that particular animal, that it's no longer it's at least a revenue stream. They may not fall in love with cranes, but they're going to at least say, well, I get, $1,500 for someone to come and hunt on my property for a couple of days or whatever.
How it would work is it's different. It's an economic engine, but not in that way.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a hunting season on cranes, they would be eligible for compensation for the damage.
Oh, okay. So they have a damage.
What right now, permit or license revenues from deer, bear, turkey go into a pot, and then there's a $500 deductible, and then there's a ceiling on it, et cetera, et cetera. But speaking in generalities, if suddenly sandhill cranes were eligible for that, so there's a hunting season on them. This population is about 100,000 birds in this eastern population, managed population.
Okay.
Compare that to the mid-continent population, also managed and hunted in many states and Canadian provinces. There's 1 million plus birds in there. So that's the scale that we're talking about.
Right.
So the eastern population is hunted currently in 3 states: Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. So wintering areas where a lot of breeding populations will mix. So it's less of if there was hunting season here, it could harm a breeding population, which could cause the
Right.
population to crash. If it was
To
over
crash, yeah.
So there is a maximum number of permits that are given, and they're almost always not filled. I can't think of the numbers right now, but it's online.
No, it's a hard bird to
it
hunt, from what I understand. It's not an easy
is.
bird to hunt.
Yeah. The first
So,
year here would be very easy. The second year,
right.
not so much. Yeah. So, so we've talked with guys that we know in the Wisconsin Department of
Yeah.
Natural Resources, and say there would be about 400 tags.
Yeah.
So that is the max. And even at $20, a majority of that goes to administrative costs. $2 goes into the fund. If everybody that has crop damage
$800
tips into that, it would go bankrupt in a year. So that's just not tenable.
Yeah, it's not going to work. And I think so. So in terms of, if someone gets a depredation permit and let's say they get permission to trap, is the bird trappable? Can you do a walk-in trap for this bird? No. Or is it?
No, it's lethal. It's a rifle.
You'd be with a rifle. Okay.
Yeah. So here's the thing. And so, people say, well, a hunting season obviously is in the fall. This is a spring season.
Right.
So that is a disconnect.
Yeah.
The revenue stream that it would create is negligible.
Right.
But right now, the numbers for the last time that we have numbers, the number of birds that were harvested in all three of those hunting seasons, there were more birds taken by depredation permit in Wisconsin. And it's just not doing anything except making a farmer maybe feel better because he shot a crane, and it's just not helping with the damage problem.
Yeah.
So what we're really, really focused on is a solution that we know works.
Yeah.
In the chemical itself will prevent the crane from taking that corn speed. But now we need to make sure that all the farmers that need it can get it in an efficient and in a less expensive manner.
Right. Well, I would encourage, if I was to give any limited advice here, I would be looking at what some states will have, things like a 24C. It doesn't look like you may not need a 24C, but sometimes some regulations could be loosened up to have someone do a niche program to be a seed treater for that. And so maybe there's someone in our audience. We have, wildlife control operators are kind of a pretty creative bunch at times.
Yeah.
And
I can tell them exactly where to set up shop in Wisconsin.
So this would be maybe some reach out, look at being a seed treater as a niche business, and especially as some people looking for retirement income, and maybe a way to go. And certainly you're going to have the feel good. You probably get a ton of publicity on the news. So your advertising budget would probably need to be pretty low, given the kind of stories that would be done on it if you decided to move down that particular path. Are there any concluding, because you had a book, I wanted you to be sure you show the book to our audience as we're wrapping up here. This tome, yes. Yep. So talk a little about this, and then your 14-page document, which is sort of a synthesis of this.
Yeah, the one commonality of all 15 species worldwide is that they all use human-dominated landscapes, mostly agriculture, at some point of their annual cycle. So because that often puts them in conflict with people, we created this book. So this is available online. You can see a link to that.
We'll provide a link for you. It's downloadable PDF. If you want to really get geeky, this is the document you want to read.
It is full of case studies and references, and a lot of what works and what doesn't in various, everything from industrial size farming to subsistence farming.
Excellent.
But this is quite the tome. So yes, at the same link where this is at, we now just today came out with a 14-page summary of some of those solutions and how to deal with specifically cranes in an agricultural landscape. So
outstanding. That'll be very helpful for our audience, for those that, because I know many of you don't have any problems with, no clients with cranes. but things change. So we're way ahead of the curve here.
They're an adaptable species. So
That's right. So we're going to see this definitely happening some more. And any final comments before we go?
Yeah, just that is, cranes live with us. We live around them, but there's ways to get along. But if anybody comes to Wisconsin, please do come and visit us and learn more about the work that we do with cranes worldwide. We are open May 1st to October 31st every year here in Baraboo, Wisconsin at the International Crane Foundation. And we're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. So we've been doing this a long time and really working not even so much with cranes, but we work with people where cranes are to make sure that cranes are not a problem for people.
And it's a great family spot if you want to bring kids along. They have walking trails, and you can see some of the cranes, and they'll hear them sound off occasionally, and they can be and they have a little museum there for you as well. But
it's the only place in the world where you can see all 15 species of crane.
It's definitely an amazing place. And what does it cost to a visit?
I know that adult admission is $12.50, and then seniors will get a discount, and children are less.
Yeah, it's worth the money, folks. Yeah, I paid my entry fee was paid by the conference I went to, so I don't know what it cost.
It's all on our website.
Paid for our grant. I think our grant took care of it. So, but nevertheless, definitely worthwhile. So, everyone, we're wrapping up here. Ann Lacey, she is the North American Director of the Eastern Flyway Project with the International Crane Foundation, and the website there is Saving Cranes, plural, .org, savingcranes.org. And again, we know that most of you are not going to be dealing with cranes on a regular basis. However, as populations change, as your business changes, you have some resources here that you can be to service that call in a responsible way. Do keep in mind that we have the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Become familiar with that. I think I've already done a podcast on that in the past. Definitely look into that. And this is the time to learn about it before you need it, because the process can be a little slow. But there's also going to be methods that you can use without having to be involved with the permitting process. And you're going to have to go through all those anyways before they even give you a permit. So you might as well learn about it anyway. And then you may want to think about, for those of you in the Florida area and some of those non-migratory bird species, you may find that this is something you might want to do some reading up on, because those numbers are probably going to grow over time. And so there's probably going to be some conflicts, and you want to be definitely ahead of the curve. But I would certainly suggest getting a hold of that book, or the 14-page document. We'll have a link in the Chiron below here for you to download that, just to have that available, because you want to get quality information. And this is the go-to organization, the International Crane Foundation, savingcranes.org. So savingcranes.org is their website. And so you'll find a wealth of information there. Well, Miss Lacey, I want to thank you very much for being part of our podcast. And really hopefully you don't be a stranger and talk some more, because maybe we'll talk about some of those cranes in the Australian, New Zealand world, because we have some audience down there in the English-speaking world. And of course, you've all been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek podcast family. We're glad to have you on board. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel, give us a 5-star review. And if you need to make some comments about the show, you can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And then, of course, this is Living the Wildlife. Why? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everybody.